So, good morning, everyone. We talked about this some months ago, but I wanted to revisit the question of hope because it had come up in some discussions I had with some other folks. And I'll start with a quote from the late Bishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa. He says, quote, "Hope is being able to see that there is light despite all the darkness. Hope is being able to see that there is light despite all the darkness." But before we get into the meat of it, I want to distinguish between how we talk about hope in Buddhism versus the sort of ordinary, generic way we talk about hope. And in Buddhism, what I'm going to call today ordinary hope is based in desire and clinging, by which I mean it is wanting or wishing for an outcome different than might happen. And with this kind of hope, expectations are always hovering in the background, and it can cause a tremendous amount of suffering. I hope that it didn't rain the other day. Well, it rained, and then if I'm attached to the fact that it shouldn't have rained, I'm going to be unhappy and suffering. It's the fear that our wishes will not be fulfilled, the fear that we will be disappointed. So, ordinary hope is both a form of suffering and an expression of fear. Wise hope, what I really want to emphasize today, on the other hand, is seeing things as they truly are, including the truth of suffering. So we see both the existence of suffering and our capacity to transform it. We aspire to certain things, but recognize the reality of what we're dealing with, that it may or may not happen. So we don't become overly attached to the outcome. That's the central theme of today, that we don't become overly attached to the outcome. It's when we realize we don't know what will happen that we keep this kind of hope alive, this wise hope. This spaciousness of uncertainty is the very space we need to act. So we come into it with a spaciousness, because too often we become paralyzed by the belief that there is nothing to hope for. Things appear hopeless, that we have no power or no reason to act. And wise hope does not mean denying these realities. It means facing these realities, addressing these realities, and remembering what else is present that moves us to address the suffering right now. Okay. So as we always talk about here in Buddhism, we share a common aspiration to awaken from or free ourselves from as much suffering as possible. And we have wise hope that we can do so. Okay, Dostoevsky said, quote, "To live without hope is to cease to live," end quote. But the type of hope is very important in terms of whether we suffer or whether we aspire to things with an expectation that it may not happen. Dostoevsky's words remind us that apathy is not an enlightened path. We are called to live with possibility, with wise hope, knowing full well that impermanence is always lurking around the next corner. So it is hope without desire or clinging to the idea that life should be other than it is. Hope is fine, but when we cling to the idea that life should be other than it is, we're going to suffer. Okay. Hope is an attitude of the heart and mind, sometimes subtle. It's essential for this human life. Hope gets us out of bed in the morning. It's the belief that things can and will improve, but not to be confused with expectation. That may sound, we often folks use those interchangeably, hope and expectation, not the same. Expectation focuses on a specific outcome, and hope is more generalized. Wise hope is generalized. It is not that specific. It's more like an outlook or an attitude, a sort of a positive outlook, not wishful thinking, childlike self-delusion. It is an active, realistic outlook, a spacious perspective. So, but hoping for a specific outcome and attaching our happiness to it is a sure invitation for suffering. So we need awareness of attachment to outcome posing as hope. We have to be able to use our discernment to discriminate between a hope which is clinging to an expectation and hope which is spacious and positive, positive outlook. Because wise hope is necessarily tied to uncertainty, because we have no way of predicting or controlling the outcome, which is why wise hope is general and broad, not specific. It's why wise hope is spacious, because we know because of impermanence that change happens. Impermanence happens. And we need faith and hope in a wise, spacious way to recognize this. You know, I've had periods in my life, in my own life, that were characterized by a real sense of hopelessness, and I saw these specific outcomes as a way out. If only X would change, my life would be better. If only I had a new boss, my life would be better. If only I had this, that, or the other. But hope for a specific outcome was a trap for me. And the trap was, what if those things didn't happen? And often they didn't. My suffering was even worse. So this is why we need to find a more generalized hope and understanding in that context that my suffering was impermanent, that things would get better, but I could not make them get better necessarily. That patience, which we talked about here often, was required along with more spacious and wise hope. I had wonderful teachers at the time that helped me formulate and see this. And in fact, things did eventually change for the better. I put in motion things I could control that might help things get better. And in fact, they did. And when that happened, it really was a wake-up call for me. It verified for me, and instilled confidence in me. And cultivating that kind of wise, open, spacious hope, things could get better. So let's talk just for a minute then about faith, as Sharon Salzberg talks about it in her book called Faith, which I think is a prerequisite for hope. So confirmed faith, so-called confirmed faith, is based on knowledge, not just a hunch. Knowledge that the Dharma will make good on the promise of what the Buddha taught. Again, not in a specific way, but in a broad way. Faith is not just about religious adherence to dogma, which is how it's typically thought of and used in our culture. But on our path, it is about trusting that the truth of the Buddha's teachings can be relied on to lessen our suffering. And that faith, the faith in these teachings, has survived for 2,600 years, and I would suggest it's probably because they work pretty well. The Buddha said, quote, "Faith is the beginning of all good things," end quote. Faith is the beginning of all good things. In other words, no matter what we encounter in life, it is faith that enables us to pick up and try again, to trust again, to love again, to keep aspiring to have less suffering in our lives. Because even in the depths of our suffering, faith reminds us that all things change, that we can move forward. I often say to myself and to others when they're suffering, it is impermanent. It will not last. Now, sometimes things last, but even when there's things like chronic pain, it sort of ebbs and flows. So a specific example here in terms of faith is that faith means trust. Trust that this path is true even when we're experiencing doubt. Faith can mean inspiration, that we are inspired to tackle the challenges and the barriers in our lives. Faith can mean confidence, which is when we call on our past experience to motivate us to meet difficulty, knowing that we had overcome difficulties in the past. It is the confidence knowing that, hey, I've been here before. Let me ride this out. Let me bring all the best skills I can, and this too shall pass. Remember, the Buddha said, don't take my word for it. Try it out and see for yourself. So I would argue that we can't have hope, the kind of hope I'm describing, without faith. The opposite of faith is doubt, and doubt undermines hope. And so we need to mindfully pay attention to when doubt starts to creep into our practice. Oh, this isn't really working. I'm still feeling kind of yucky, whatever. And remember, when the Buddha talked about the 5 hindrances on our path, doubt is one of the 5. He said it's one of the hindrances to our spiritual practice. And at some point, I'll talk about the other four, which are sensual desire and greed. That's one and the same. Ill will and aversion, sloth and torpor, just sort of getting tired and sluggish, and restlessness or anxiety. Those are the other four hindrances. But doubt is right in the middle of them, and it comes up in lots of different ways. We may doubt the teachings. We may doubt if our practice is correct. We may doubt our teachers or the experiences we're having. It may arise with a disguise that seduces us into believing our stories. Oh, I'll never get this. This will never work for me. That's doubt creeping in. And it's a dangerous hindrance because if unnoticed, it can pull us away from our practice. It can discourage us. It can make us want to throw in the towel. We also may cultivate faith or conviction instead of doubt, which and reflect on the benefits of the practice in ourselves or in others. So I want to close with this saying from our Zen brothers and sisters who say, fall 7 times, stand up 8. Fall 7 times, stand up 8. That is wise hope. That is hope that as we talk about it, not ordinary attached clinging hope. So let me stop. And I love this topic. Okay.